One Punch Man chapter 173 just came out, and it introduced us to a connection between God and Saitama. There is something very fishy going on here. God is drawn to the power of Saitama because he removed his limiter. And he's been creating all of these monsters throughout the last couple of years. As they stated in this chapter, there has been a huge increase in the amount of monsters and the strength of these monsters that comes out on a way more frequent basis than usual. And this is all because of God's doing, presumably because he's trying to draw Saitama out and or destroy Saitama. But it's a little bit peculiar to me how when God spoke to Saitama, he didn't really act like he knew him. But at this point in this chapter, we're being told that God is being drawn specifically to Saitama. So perhaps God doesn't know that it's this bald guy, but perhaps he knows that there is someone on the planet that has broken their limiter, and he's trying to seek him out for some sort of reason, maybe to take over his body, maybe to have the first challenge that God has ever had in an actual battle, or maybe he needs someone with no limit to unlock him from this prison that he's in. Now, also, interestingly, we learned a lot about Blast in this chapter, and Blast actually came face to face with God 2 years ago, which is exactly around the time that Saitama broke his limiter, because in the battle with Carnage Kabuto, Saitama said it took him 3 years of training. At some point in there, during his 100 sit-ups and 100 push-ups and 10-kilometer run every day, he turned into a god, essentially. He broke his limits. He lost his hair because of it. Dr. Genus even confirmed that as Zombie Man was having the flashback of his communication with Dr. Genus. And then again, interestingly, they're trying to show us in this chapter that God is coming because for some reason attracted to the power of Saitama, as they give us this eerie image of Saitama's back turned and they say God is being drawn to something here. But it appears, from everything that we know about the lore and the chapters leading up to this point, that God is more interested in Blast, because Blast actually has the capability to see him, to refuse his power, to battle him. We saw this picture of Blast and he's bloody. It looked like he had a short but devastating battle with God. Unless all that blood and damage is from Elder Centipede, we don't really know that for sure yet. But what I'm really curious about is back in chapter 137, when Saitama and Flashy Flash were talking to God after Saitama picked up the Dark Cube and then Blast arrived, God was very excited at the fact that Blast was there, but he wasn't even curious at all about Saitama. So it appears that God must not know that Saitama's the one that broke his limiter. Maybe he thinks it's Blast because Blast is the only one that can, see him. We saw that Saitama couldn't even see God. Back in the chapter when Garo was getting his transfusion of God power and he was lifting up to the sky as God was walking like these thunderous giant footsteps on Earth, even Saitama couldn't see it. He could see the thunder cloud, the strange dimensional cloud that formed in the planet, but he couldn't see God's feet. And I believe Garo could, but we can't really confirm that either. But it appears that Blast can see it because he has these space-time capabilities. He's able to see God when nobody else can. So I'm assuming that God probably cares a lot more about Blast than he does about Saitama at this point, and perhaps he thinks that Blast is the one that broke his limiters. Perhaps it's just simply because Blast is the only one that can really go up against him and none of the other S-rank heroes can. We know that Saitama could, but that battle probably isn't coming for a long time. If we go back to chapter 137, I really wonder what would happen if Blast never showed up and Saitama just accepted the power, although I think we all know he wouldn't do that. So there's some lingering questions here that fans have been asking. Is Blast capable of remembering the future because he has space-time capabilities? Does he know that Saitama fought God Garo, destroyed Jupiter, and saved the planet after traveling back in time? And we don't know yet. We'll probably find out at some point if Blast remembers that future where Saitama fought Garo on the moon of Jupiter. But the reason why it's important is because if Blast can remember it, that means that God probably does too. And if God didn't know who was the human that broke his limiter before, he almost certainly does now. God Garo, or Cosmic Fear Garo, was easily the strongest opponent we've ever seen in the series up to date. He was far stronger than Boros, in my opinion. And Saitama became so much stronger. That power scaling graph, being able to blow up Jupiter with a sneeze, that's gotta catch God's eye. And I think because Blast has time-space capabilities, it's almost certain, like 99.99% certain, that God does as well. I mean, we've already seen him speak through dimensional barriers. Blast was talking about a dimensional barrier in the chapter 164 original before it was redrawn. So if he's talking and walking through dimensional barriers, he probably exists beyond time itself as well. And in that case, I'm sure he knows that Saitama was the one who broke his limits. But there's a lot of content coming up based on the webcomic. Don't worry, I won't spoil you. And while all this discussion is very new because it didn't happen in the webcomic, I feel like One and Murata are still going to have to kind of continue the story of the webcomic and drop little hints and tidbits of information along the way. There is one character, I won't get into spoilers because I want to make a whole video on it, but there was an image in the last chapter of Blast standing next to this ninja guy with a map, and he had two swords on his back. Now, I have a feeling that this ninja guy is going to get an infusion of power from God, and that's going to be coming up here within a few months, probably. The infusion of God is a relatively trivial plot point in the webcomic because it only happened once, and it was to Homeless Emperor. And it was just something that they dropped in, like you weren't sure if maybe it was just crazy or what, but it's been embellished so much in the manga that obviously we know now God does exist and he is the final boss of One Punch Man. I don't see anything being above God. And so this character, this ninja guy, was supposed to be insanely strong in the webcomic. They did like whole chapters on him, talking about him and all this stuff. So I think what's going to happen here is he's going to be like kind of rewritten. And because it appears that One and Murata want to continue dropping hints and information about God and Blast throughout the series, I think the reason they do that is because it makes fans go crazy with excitement. So I think they're going to continue to do that. And I believe that this ninja guy with double swords, who used to be one of Blast's comrades, will be the next God avatar. And so when that comes, we will undoubtedly get more information about God and Blast, or at least Blast's past, these cadre of heroes that he was with going around collecting these cubes. I mean, that's something that's probably a whole nother video topic on its own. The transmitters, these dark cubes that they're going around collecting. What is the point of them? Why does God need them? How does he use them? Why does he use them? So many questions. Maybe it's a little bit too early to make a video on it. There's definitely like a missing puzzle piece to the story that we haven't figured out yet with that. Considering what I was talking about earlier with God now most likely knowing that Saitama is the human that broke his limits, I think if he does infuse God power to this ninja guy, then that could be Saitama's next big fight. Now, you got to remember that Blast and company, his whole galactic cadre, were extremely surprised at the strength of Garo, of God Garo, because he was an avatar of a scale that I guess they either hadn't seen before, or he was just one of the strongest God avatars that they'd ever seen. And they were very surprised that Saitama was able to go up against him. So if this ninja guy gets infusion, I mean, is he as strong as Blast, like naturally? Are we gonna get to see like what Blast would have been like at his level if he was infused with God power? I think it's probably going to come up. To be honest, minor spoilers here, in the webcomic, there's not really any main enemy for Saitama. So I think that they're going to write this ninja guy to be a new God avatar that fights Saitama, and perhaps if God is able to communicate through him, God may potentially have a conversation with Saitama there. And after this whole arc is over, it could just quite simply become the God arc. I mean, if One and Murata want to wrap up this series, after the Mad Cyborg arc, it definitely could go on to the God War Against God arc. God knows how long that could take, but that could just be like the final arc of the series. And to be honest, I'd be okay with that. I mean, I don't think really too much more of the story has to be dissected. They've established so much with all of the characters. They've told us all of these backstories and everything, explained a lot of their powers. And now that we know about God and that he's the one who's turning everybody into monsters, and there's all this build up towards God, I think they're kind of signaling to us here that after the Mad Cyborg arc, which will be probably a year or two from now, we're going to get into the War on God arc. And that's super, super exciting. I'm hoping that this crazy ninja guy gets an infusion of power from God and then fights Saitama. God figures out that Saitama is the one who has no limits, and then either breaks free from his cage or something, and we're going to have this crazy battle with Saitama versus God. I'm so excited for that. I mean, it's just the level of hype and excitement will just be completely out of this world. I mean, One Punch Man fans were going crazy enough for just Saitama versus God Garo, and we knew what was going to happen too, for the most part. Imagine no webcomic, and we're getting Saitama versus God going on for like months. Just imagine the levels of hype on the internet. I mean, it's just going to be so crazy, dude. Anyways, guys, I love talking about One Punch Man. I was so happy about this chapter because there's so much to talk about. There's so much new tidbits information. We learned about Blast God. We saw the ninja guy. We learned about the dark cubes. And so I think the next video I want to make on this topic is talking about the ninja guy specifically with spoilers and everything like that. Don't worry, I'll give you a warning there, but that'll come out probably, in a couple days or so. So make sure you're subscribed and notifications enabled, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.